They were once the most feared men in Nazi Germany. But after the war, the surviving Gestapo officers faced a reckoning that history would never forget. If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. Once feared, now hunted. Their world crumbled in a single day. Gestapo officers, long the enforcers of terror and oppression, faced the sudden and total collapse of the Nazi regime. Headquarters were abandoned, communication lines severed, and cities once under strict control erupted in chaos. The meticulous order and dominance that had defined their existence vanished almost overnight, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. For the audience, this opening creates immediate suspense, drawing viewers into the stark contrast between past power and present fragility. Officers scrambled to assess their situation. Files, dossiers, and sensitive documents had to be destroyed or secured, as falling into Allied hands could mean certain death or imprisonment. Staff moved quickly, attempting to salvage whatever remained of their authority, even as streets filled with refugees, advancing troops, and opportunistic civilians. The psychological strain was immense. Men accustomed to issuing commands now confronted the stark reality of their powerlessness. Viewers are engaged emotionally, imagining the fear and tension inherent in a rapid loss of control. The collapse of authority was not uniform. Some officers tried to maintain order within pockets of loyalists, issuing hurried directives to avoid complete disintegration. Others succumbed to panic, fleeing without plan or coordination. Eyewitness accounts describe a mix of desperation, bravado, and confusion. The audience gains insight into human behavior under extreme stress, understanding how even those who perpetrated fear could now be paralyzed by the uncertainty and danger surrounding them. Amid the chaos, the threat of capture loomed large. Allied and Soviet forces were advancing rapidly, systematically rounding up remaining Nazi personnel. Officers had to navigate destroyed infrastructure, checkpoints, and sporadic patrols. Each decision, whether to hide, flee, or attempt negotiation, carried life or death stakes. Suspense is heightened as viewers witness the precarious balance between strategy and chance. Feeling the tension of every potential encounter with enemy forces, the moral and psychological dimensions were equally profound. Gestapo officers, once enforcers of strict law and brutal punishment, now faced the consequences of their actions. Fear, guilt, and the instinct for survival intertwined, creating a complex psychological landscape. For the audience, this dual tension between external danger and internal reckoning maintains engagement, curiosity, and emotional investment. Ultimately, the end of authority for Gestapo officers highlights the fragility of power when faced with systemic collapse. The sudden reversal, from terrorizing agents of control to hunted fugitives, sets the stage for the narrative to explore escape attempts, trials, and moral consequences. The audience is left both anxious and intellectually engaged, eager to follow the officers' subsequent struggles, narrow escapes, and the unraveling of the last remnants of their authority. Suspense, historical immersion, and psychological insight converge, compelling viewers to continue through the story of survival, justice, and human behavior in extreme circumstances. That every shadow could conceal justice. Every step carried risk. Gestapo officers, once wielding terror with impunity, now faced the stark reality of a world turned against them. In the immediate aftermath of Nazi Germany's defeat, many attempted to flee Berlin and other collapsing cities, seeking refuge in remote villages, forests, or sympathetic territories. Their movements were cautious, calculated, and driven by the urgent instinct to survive. The audience is immediately immersed in suspense, witnessing the precarious transition from absolute authority to hunted fugitive. Escape was a complex endeavor. Officers had to navigate destroyed infrastructure, bombed bridges, crumbled roads, and blocked railways, while avoiding checkpoints manned by advancing Allied and Soviet forces. Some relied on false papers, disguises, or assumed identities to blend with the civilian population, while others attempted to move under the cover of night. Each choice was fraught with danger, and any misstep could lead to capture, execution, or exposure. Viewers experience both tension and empathy, understanding the stakes and uncertainty of survival in this chaotic environment. Encounters with local populations were unpredictable. Villagers often viewed fleeing Gestapo with a mixture of fear, anger, and opportunism. Some attempted to hide or aid officers, motivated by personal loyalty or coercion, while others reported sightings to the Allies or took matters into their own hands. These interactions created moments of suspense, as a single misjudgment could unravel even the most carefully planned escape. The audience becomes deeply engaged, imagining the psychological and moral challenges of evading justice in a devastated landscape. The threat of capture intensified as intelligence networks coordinated across liberated territories. Allied forces, using eyewitness reports, intercepted communications, and systematic sweeps, closed in on suspected hiding places. Officers who had escaped immediate danger found themselves pursued relentlessly, with every decision whether to stay in a small village, board a train, or move through a forested area bearing lethal consequences. Suspense is maintained, drawing viewers into the psychological tension and unpredictability of this post-war environment. Ultimately, the flight and capture of Gestapo officers illustrate the rapid reversal of power and the vulnerability of even the most feared individuals when structures of control collapse. Their desperate attempts to evade justice underscore both human ingenuity and the ever-present consequences of past actions. For the audience, this section provides historical immersion, suspense, and emotional engagement, creating anticipation for the next chapter where trials, evasion, and the long-term fate of these officers are revealed. Each narrow escape, shadowed alley, and calculated movement reinforces curiosity and empathy, ensuring viewers remain invested in the unfolding story of accountability, survival, and moral reckoning. Behind courtroom doors, lives hung in balance, justice waiting to strike. Surviving Gestapo officers, once feared enforcers of terror, were now subject to the full scrutiny of Allied tribunals. Their names and actions, meticulously documented throughout the war, became the foundation of legal proceedings designed to hold them accountable. The atmosphere was tense. Judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys moved methodically through evidence, while spectators and journalists observed the unfolding spectacle. For the audience, this scene evokes suspense and moral engagement. As they confront the consequences of power abused and justice demanded, arrests were followed by extensive interrogations. Officers were questioned about operations, identities of collaborators, and their roles in wartime atrocities. These sessions revealed both the strategic planning of Gestapo operations and the human capacity for deception and denial. Some admitted culpability, weighed down by the certainty of evidence. Others feigned ignorance or attempted to deflect blame onto subordinates. Viewers are drawn into the psychological tension, considering both the inner calculations of the accused and the meticulous work of investigators. The courtroom became a stage where morality, legality, and human behavior intersected. Witnesses, including survivors, civilians, and former colleagues, recounted events that ranged from bureaucratic enforcement to deliberate acts of terror. Each testimony contributed to a narrative that exposed the scope and systematic nature of Gestapo crimes. Suspense is heightened for the audience, who are prompted to anticipate verdicts and weigh the fairness and completeness of justice in the aftermath of unprecedented atrocities. Legal outcomes varied significantly. Some officers were sentenced to prison or executed, while others, due to lack of evidence or political considerations, managed to avoid severe punishment. This uneven justice reflected both the challenges of post-war law and the intricacies of gathering reliable testimony amidst destroyed infrastructure and shifting alliances. For viewers, this creates curiosity and ethical reflection. How do societies balance the need for accountability with practical constraints and human fallibility? The psychological consequences for surviving officers were profound. Detainment, interrogation, and public scrutiny stripped them of authority and forced confrontation with the magnitude of their actions. Fear, shame, and regret mingled with stubborn denial in many cases. The audience experiences emotional engagement as they observe the collapse of a feared institution through the lens of individual lives, humanizing history while emphasizing moral stakes. Ultimately, the courtroom phase demonstrates the transformation from unchecked power to structured accountability. It highlights the painstaking process by which societies attempt to confront mass atrocities and deliver justice, even amidst chaos and complexity. For viewers, this section provides suspense, moral tension, and historical immersion, setting the stage for the next section, exploring evasion, disguise, and the remarkable efforts of some officers to avoid consequences, keeping the narrative compelling and continuous. Some vanished into plain sight, their pasts hidden beneath new faces. After surviving post-war trials or evading capture, certain Gestapo officers managed to disappear into the shattered fabric of post-war Europe. Cities lay in ruins, displaced populations moved across borders, and law enforcement was stretched thin. This environment of chaos and confusion provided opportunities for those desperate to escape justice. For the audience, suspense is immediate. Every step, every forged document, every disguise becomes a matter of life or death. Officers assumed false identities, often adopting the personas of ordinary civilians or displaced persons. They blended into communities, took on menial jobs, and avoided drawing attention. Some fled to rural areas where memory of the war was fragmented. Others sought refuge in countries less invested in prosecuting former Nazi officials. The narrative draws viewers into curiosity and tension. How could notorious enforcers of terror disappear so completely? And what methods did they employ to survive? Psychological adaptation was as crucial as physical evasion. The officers had to suppress former identities while constantly monitoring potential threats. The fear of recognition, betrayal, or accidental disclosure shaped their daily lives. Diaries and later testimonies reveal constant vigilance, internalized stress, and a paradoxical combination of arrogance and paranoia. The audience is engaged emotionally and intellectually, contemplating the human capacity for deception and the moral compromises inherent in survival under extreme circumstances. Some officers leverage networks of sympathizers, former collaborators, or families to facilitate their concealment. Assistance came in the form of false papers, hidden accommodations, and even financial support, often motivated by loyalty, fear, or shared ideology. These clandestine arrangements highlight the interplay between human cunning and social networks, adding layers of suspense as viewers imagine the risks involved and the intricate planning required to remain undetected. Over time, some individuals managed to reintegrate into post-war society with startling success. They assumed professional roles, raised families, and lived for decades without ever being apprehended. Their reintegration poses difficult ethical questions, prompting audiences to reflect on justice, morality, and the limits of historical accountability. Meanwhile, investigators and historians continued to uncover traces of their pasts, creating a persistent tension between concealment and discovery that fuels ongoing fascination. Ultimately, the escape and reintegration of Gestapo officers underscores the complexity of post-war justice and the interplay of human ingenuity, fear, and survival instinct. For viewers, this section maintains suspense, intellectual curiosity, and moral engagement, bridging the gap between historical reality and human behavior under extreme pressure. Every disguised identity, every close call, and every successful reintegration reinforces tension, anticipation, and ethical contemplation, keeping audiences captivated while exploring the enduring consequences of wartime actions. Names etched in records, some notorious, others forgotten, marked the enduring legacy of Gestapo officers who survived the collapse of Nazi Germany. Even decades after the war, historians, archivists, and investigative journalists worked tirelessly to reconstruct the movements, crimes, and fates of these men. Official documents, intelligence files, trial transcripts, and personal testimonies created a mosaic of evidence, revealing both the systematic operations of the Gestapo and the human ingenuity employed to evade accountability. For the audience, this evokes suspense and intellectual engagement, as each fragment of information connects to a broader narrative of justice, memory, and morality. Post-war investigations relied on meticulous cross-referencing. Allied forces and newly established governments examined captured files, interviewed witnesses, and tracked down individuals who had assumed false identities. Each discovery shed light on past atrocities and the survival strategies of those who had once wielded terror. Audiences are drawn into a detective-like pursuit, piecing together historical facts while considering the psychological and ethical dimensions of survival under extreme pressure. The societal memory of surviving Gestapo officers was complex. Some became cautionary tales in post-war narratives, their names synonymous with cruelty and oppression. Others faded from collective memory, either due to successful evasion or lack of public awareness. Documentaries, academic works, and oral histories preserved some of these stories, highlighting the tension between remembered infamy and historical obscurity. Viewers experience both curiosity and moral reflection, contemplating how societies reconcile justice, memory, and historical narrative. This historical reckoning also illuminated the limits of post-war accountability. While tribunals and prosecutions secured justice for many, gaps remained. Some officers integrated into civilian life, others benefited from political or bureaucratic oversight, and some were shielded by the complexities of emerging Cold War alliances. Each unresolved case heightened audience engagement, as viewers grapple with the uneasy reality that justice was often partial and memory selective. Suspense is maintained as they ponder which figures were held accountable and which vanished into history. Ultimately, the work of historians and researchers demonstrates the enduring power of memory and record-keeping in shaping our understanding of the past. By documenting, verifying, and interpreting evidence, these scholars provide both closure and continued moral questioning. For viewers, the section offers historical immersion, intellectual curiosity, and ethical engagement, prompting reflection on how societies remember perpetrators of atrocities, the challenges of reconstructing truth, and the responsibilities of collective memory. Every document, testimony, and historical account contributes to a complex narrative, ensuring that even those who escaped immediate justice cannot fully erase their mark on history. The past speaks, teaching vigilance, justice, and the cost of complicity. The fate of surviving Gestapo officers offers enduring lessons, both for historians and contemporary society. These men, once enforcers of terror and oppression, illustrate the consequences of unchecked power, moral compromise, and systemic evil. Even decades later, their stories serve as cautionary tales, emphasizing the importance of ethical accountability, legal oversight, and societal responsibility. The audience is invited to reflect, considering how actions taken under authority ripple through history, affecting both victims and the moral fabric of communities. Ethically, the surviving officers' experiences highlight the consequences of participation in atrocities. Even when immediate punishment is avoided, many lived under assumed identities, hiding from justice. Yet their deeds remain documented in archives, testimonies, and public memory. The audience experiences suspense and curiosity, imagining how human behavior adapts when authority conflicts with conscience, and how survival often requires both ingenuity and moral compromise. Each story becomes a lens through which viewers can examine the delicate balance between obedience and responsibility. Societal lessons are equally compelling. Post-war trials, incomplete as they were, reveal the challenges of delivering justice in the aftermath of mass violence. Some perpetrators were prosecuted, while others escaped or reintegrated into communities, prompting reflection on legal systems, the rule of law, and the limits of human judgment. The audience is encouraged to consider modern parallels, how institutions monitor power, enforce accountability, and address complicity in both political and organizational contexts. Suspense and moral tension are maintained as viewers grapple with the uneven outcomes of justice, Psychologically, the surviving officers demonstrate the effects of guilt, fear, and adaptation under extreme circumstances. While some lived quietly, others remained haunted by past actions, illustrating the enduring internal consequences of moral transgression. By connecting historical events to psychological realities, viewers gain empathy, insight, and curiosity about human behavior under duress. This deepens engagement, bridging historical analysis with contemporary ethical and moral questions. Ultimately, the lessons drawn from the fate of surviving Gestapo officers resonate beyond history. They emphasize the imperative of vigilance, the importance of ethical reflection, and the societal cost of complicity. For the audience, this section provides intellectual stimulation, moral engagement, and emotional resonance, leaving viewers with lingering reflection on accountability, justice, and the choices individuals make under authority. Suspense, curiosity, and ethical inquiry converge, ensuring that the story of these officers continues to provoke thought, discussion, and moral consideration long after the narrative concludes.